We wouldn't be the Real Story Group if we didn't forewarn you about all the challenges you're likely to encounter with agents in general and orchestration agents in particular.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about what to watch out for you, the MarTech leader. And we know that you're excited about agents.
Welcome to Real Story on MarTech. Ruthless advocates for your MarTech mission. Advising buyers with just the facts on stacks to get you on the right track.
All right, welcome back to The Real Story on MarTech. I'm Jarrod, Gingras, Managing Director of the Real Story Group.
And I'm Tony Byrne, founder of Real Story Group.
Okay, Tony, today we're going to be talking about Agentic AI in the future of your MarTech stack.
AI agents, woohoo! Jarrod, can you contain your excitement?
Oh yeah, you know I can, Tony. But as usual, when new technology arises, we should all remember that the real story on agents is that they're just another means to an end.
No. Jarrod, where is your vision, man? Just this morning, I saw an article on LinkedIn by a prominent MarTech consultant who said that agents are going to take over your stack in 2026, man. This stuff, agents are truly transformational for MarTech.
Well, I think where our listeners can rest assured that we're going to deliver the real story today, and much of which we're going to talk about is actually coming straight from our corporate members. So this isn't us just making things up willy-nilly, right? We're going to get right into the real story. So let's get into it, Tony.
Okay, let's begin, Jarrod, as we always do, with some level setting. Just what is an agent?
Yeah, so at a basic level, I think it's important to know that agents automate and sequence tasks, right? So they can do this either within a platform. You know, every vendor has some story about agents in their platform that they're selling. You know, we tend to call those task or workflow agents. Or alternatively, you can apply agents across your MarTech stack where they're operating across multiple different systems. And we call those orchestration agents. So task and workflow in this platform, orchestration across the platform. The key here, I think, is that you shouldn't need human input at every step, right? A true agent acts as an independent, goal-driven system that uses real-time data to plan, adapt, and then take action. And ideally, improve itself as it does this.
Yeah, that last step turns out to be a big deal since natively most agents actually don't incorporate the kind of machine learning or ML that makes this possible. But we can get into that later. Anyway, I don't want to steal your thunder. You're talking about some good stuff. Keep going.
Yeah, I think the point about machine learning or ML is very true, but conceptually at least, agents can bring some real value, especially by getting beyond static or heavily manual decision making. I think this makes them particularly suited for automating or improving marketing processes, which tend to be very adaptive, or at least they should be adaptive, right? Unlike live humans, agents can be always on, context aware, and really respond immediately to change as it happens.
Yeah, wow. That sounds like robots.
Well, sort of. And I think you're onto something there because some of the agentic vendors that we're watching come out of that robotic process automation marketplace or RPA marketplace, right? But I think agents are designed to be a little bit more adaptive than robots, and dare I say a bit more human, at least in theory. And I think what's really powerful about agents in a MarTech perspective is that they get at some really very long-standing issues that we've been dealing with, really for years now.
That's right. In theory, agents address some business imperatives that are really pushing and we would say stressing out MarTech teams right now. So, you have imperatives to scale, both within and across channels. You have imperatives, of course, to do more with less, and that's going to get even more intense in 26. You have imperatives to target better for efficiency reasons, but also for effectiveness, right? And then imperatives to remove friction among different platforms or team handoffs, and relatedly then just imperatives for plain old cycle speed. I mean, we talk to MarTech leaders who are truly trying to work through what are 5, 6, 9 week campaign cycles. It's just not working for them. So in theory, agents along with core AI services offer you that. And so that's really promising. But we'll of course, a little bit later, we're going to get into the real story around this.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned core AI services because where we sit here in the end of 2025, I think AI tends to just get lumped into one big bucket. And we as analysts at Real Story Group, we like to put things into little more granular buckets. And so we came up with 3 categories of core AI services. Number 1, Insights AI, which is really what's the opportunity? Decisioning AI, what should we do about it? And Gen AI, which is what content and experiences do we create to fulfill that objective? Agents rely usually on one or more of those services.
Yeah, and that's so important. I know we're going to come back to this topic several times during the episode, and I think particularly the order that you had those insights leading to decisions and then leading to Gen AI, right? And leading with Gen AI is so important. And I think also more generally, if we take this back to an architectural level, you have core AI, which we've argued should be a layer in your MarTech stack. And then Agentic AI builds off of that. It's not a replacement for those services. And in fact, it should apply those services in an intelligent way. And this has multiple implications that we're going to get into. But I think, first of all, one myth that I want to bust right now is this idea that Agentic AI, can somehow gets you around this issue of having to mature your core AI. In other words, there's this myth that Agentic AI is going to allow you to leapfrog over core AI. And that's totally not true. Agentic AI needs these core AI services and builds around the insights, the decisions, and the generative AI.
Which means, of course, that the agents are only going to be as strong as the underlying AI services. So there's the beginning of a business case around efficiency and effectiveness. But I think what we found here at the Real Story Group, we like to advise our corporate members to align around actual use cases. And that also is how we tend to evaluate the vendors. How good are they at solving those use cases?
Yeah, so at Real Story Group, one of the first things we do is take a really hard look at the vendors in any marketplace. And so we've gone out and evaluated a couple dozen Agentic AI vendors against 9 key kind of use case categories for marketers, right? So these are business use cases. And now when we're talking about Agentic AI vendors, though, we're really talking about agent building and deployment platforms. But it turns out that some are more amenable to marketing scenarios than others.
Yeah, let's dig into those use cases, Tony. Let's give our listeners some examples.
Sure. So we have kind of 9 use case archetypes we employ in 3 categories, and my favorite ones, Jarrod, come from the insights category, where I think there's big wins here. So I think those 3 are particularly interesting. Let's talk about them real quickly. So first, there's customer and prospect intelligence use cases. So the idea here is that agents enrich core profile data, analyze behavioral signals, surface real-time insights for sales and marketing, and they act as kind of always-on research assistants and intelligence amplifiers. The second one is personalized content activation, which of course we all are struggling with. And the idea here is that agents create and adapt content dynamically. They adjust the tone, the channel, the sequencing, based on actual audience behavior. So they extend creative workflows to more kind of contextual triggers. And I know in the DAM 3.0, DAM 4.0 world, that's huge for you all. And then finally, another one that we hear a lot, although it's not necessarily easy, is agents that work around audience and segment optimization. So you could have agents that continuously refine segments and targeting rules using live performance data and external signals. And so they replace static definitions and rules with more adaptive audiences. So, those 3 come to mind, right off the bat. But, the other category beyond insights is around kind of execution acceleration. So my favorite one there is campaigns and briefs. And we're hearing a lot about this from our corporate members. So this idea that agents could manage the campaign definition, the campaign design, channel allocation, sequencing, performance adaptation, and then close the loop, between planning and delivery. And that can be a very long loop right now. So that one's exciting. We'll talk about that one a little later. And then finally, let's not forget that, like AI in general, there's a third category of use cases that get beyond execution to actual operational value. And my favorite use case here among the 3 categories would be operational analytics and forecasting. And this is one where I think it's interesting because it targets really very much a B2B type use case, where you have agents that monitor your pipeline health, they forecast trends, identify anomalies in marketing and sales performance. So you're moving beyond dashboards to more kind of real-time or even future-looking kind of interpretations, which can be of course, very powerful. The one caveat here, though, as always, is we want to tell the real story. And the real story on agentic tooling is that some platforms are better disposed to realizing some of these use cases than others, right? So as usual, technology choices matter here, but you, the MarTech leader, you need to prioritize what it is that you're seeking first.
Love those examples, Tony. Thanks for that. And but I do want to dig into a council meeting that we had last month. And for those listeners who are unfamiliar with our council, it's a group of some of the biggest brands in the world, largely Fortune 1000 type companies, leaders from these organizations who meet with each other and us on a quarterly basis, whether that's sometimes virtual and sometimes in person. Last month was our meeting that we did in a virtual setting, and we had a really great attendance. It was, I think we had over 40 different organizations represented on that call. And the focus of the meeting was we talked about agents, and we showed a prototype of a multi-step, in fact, multi-agent orchestration. And I think one of the key larger points that we saw was the difference between in-platform task agents versus those cross-platform orchestration agents and what that actually looked like. And we kind of presented that to the group and had the group kind of respond to what they saw. Did you know that 16 of the Fortune 20 enterprises have turned to Real Story Group over the years for MarTech advice, either to guide them through an important technology selection or to help them steer their stack in the right direction?
That's right, Jarrod. But our Real Story Group corporate members come in many sizes, including some really digitally focused mid-sized firms. The key thing that all these clients share is a desire to take their MarTech stack to the next level and a desire to take their professional careers to the next level. So if you want to explore that further, find us at realstorygroup.com. Okay, we're back. Tony and Jarrod talking about task agents versus orchestration agents in a MarTech context.
Yeah, that distinction is so important because when you listen closely to marketing and MarTech leaders, a lot of their wish lists around agentic AI fall into the category of cross-platform orchestration agents, like the briefing and campaign cycle use cases that you mentioned above. And yet that's not really what the market is giving us right now.
Exactly. So let's talk about what the technology marketplace is giving us right now. First, we step back a year or two, we've witnessed how every MarTech vendor has become an AI vendor, right? And some have changed the name of their platforms, even changed the name of their company. They're changing the names of the URLs. And now we see the next phase of this where we see vendors lighting up agentic features willy-nilly all over their platforms.
Yeah, I think the key word you used there was features, Tony. These tend to be simpler tasks that get presented as agents, even if some of them aren't very agentic in a technical sense, right? So now don't get me wrong, they can be useful, but...
Yeah. So give us an example of something useful.
Sure. Let's talk about a task agent that lives above your, say, data lakehouse, right? The business goal here is to improve targeting, maybe customer targeting. And so the agent listens for new raw data feeds into the lakehouse, and it makes some judgments about how that data could get converted into maybe new attributes or even improve existing attributes.
Yeah, like in the pre-AI days, you'd have a data engineer who might hook up some new paid media response data to add to the lakehouse, then someone else has to figure out, all right, first of all, did this arrive? And then secondly, what do we do with it?
Yeah, exactly. So the agent in this scenario listens for that activity and says, look, let's create some new draft customer attributes around media engagement. And let's propose that they get employed to refine some key audiences or even create new ones. A marketing data ops person reviews the suggestion and maybe makes it live. So it can save a bunch of time and guesswork if that agent is working on your behalf.
And that's great. That's really great.
Yeah, it is great. No argument, but it's not truly transformational. I think it helps a human do their job and do it faster, assuming that agent is performing high quality guesswork, right? The other key point here is that the MarTech vendor who creates and deploys that agent is constrained by working within what it knows, which is its own platform. So the agents they're making available are going to be somewhat technical in nature as opposed to
orchestration agents. So let's talk about those. And again, these are agents that work across platforms, and in many use cases, they're going to be multi-agent processes. And we've been prototyping some of these for a couple of our corporate members.
Yeah, let's talk about specifically about the one that we shared during our council meeting that we mentioned. Our colleague Apoorv Durga spent several weeks prototyping a really interesting orchestration.
Yeah, it was a 7-step orchestration that reflected a real use case brought to us by one of our corporate members. The agent, here's how it worked. The agent listened for trending topics about a particular brand or a particular product on social media. And then in the next part of the orchestration, the agent created a set of multi-channel campaigns along with a schedule and content to take advantage of some of those emerging topics. And hopefully that has immediate relevance to those of you for whom social and social listening is a key channel.
Yeah, what I found interesting is that among the different steps, it employed Insights AI, what was trending and how it was relevant to the firm's go-to-market strategy. Decisioning AI, which was how to respond with what priority and relative spend given some budget constraints we gave it. And then Gen AI to create draft artifacts and a schedule of when to deploy these artifacts.
Yeah, and once again, that order really matters. But on the whole, it was super cool, and we could all really imagine the value of it. And I would say it almost worked. And the almost part there is carrying a lot of water. It's super interesting, and I would say super important caveat for you, the MarTech leader. So here's the deal. It's relatively easy today to prototype something like this, especially in a low-code tool. This was probably 4 weeks worth of effort. But then it was like this boom, sort of moment, like just a whole nother world to put something like this out of prototype and into actual production and delivering business values. And among other things, it turns out that moving from prototype to production is a very heavy software development lift. And that honestly surprises some people and makes us think that maybe, in 2026, agents are not necessarily going to be running your whole stack.
Yeah, we see all this momentum and a lot of hard stops right before things get to production. So I know we have a lot more to say here, but I think, of course, we wouldn't be the Real Story Group if we didn't forewarn you about all the challenges you're likely to encounter with agents in general and orchestration agents in particular.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about what to watch out for you, the MarTech leader. And we know that you're excited about agents. We know a lot of people are trying to push their excitement around agents onto you. So let's talk a little bit what to watch out for with agents. And so, Jarrod, why don't you start with the challenges that agents present in general, as a general concept, including the ones that are showing up, willy-nilly from vendors all over your stack.
All right. So first off, one of the interesting things that our corporate members at that meeting explained is that in most cases they are not deploying these agents because they need to go through the very necessary enterprise vetting, even above and beyond what they would do for those core AI services we talked about. What we call at Real Story Group the responsibility matrix, issues around ethics, compliance, guardrails, all the other issues that arrive now that you have this autonomous agent acting in your environment on your behalf.
This is such a big deal that sometimes enterprise vendors, honestly, they're kind of soft pedaling that. And I just want to say to them, look, man, read the room. Some small business might take that risk with your agent that pops up, but a big enterprise, they're going to check first, and they're going to have to do some work to see whether they can really light this thing up.
The other phrase we've used several times already on this podcast is willy-nilly all over your stack, right? And that came up in that meeting multiple times. There are issues here around the potential long-term cost of these agents in hard budget terms and how those will get passed back to you, the buyer, of these agents. Agents are process intensive, and vendors are unlikely to subsidize their enterprise licensees for very long.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, they are kind of, selling this like a gateway drug, and at some point, somebody's going to have to pay for all of these tokens. So that issue remains unresolved. But, related to that question of cost is a larger issue on architecture. And so a lot of smart enterprise stack leaders are wanting to apply AI as a layer in their stack and not necessarily a feature. And we've been guiding a number of you in that direction. They do this for cost reasons, but also you want to avoid the kind of operational and experiential silos that we all need to, avoid more than ever in this era of the customer, in this era of AI. And it's the same thing really, Jarrod, with agents. If I'm using 20 agents from 15 vendors, yeah, what's the net impact on cost? But even more, what's the net impact on the customer in terms of overall, journey coherence, and how do I deal with maintainability? These are really important questions that need to get addressed and answered.
Yeah, let's go back to that council meeting, though, because I think we saw our corporate members themselves, without even any prompting from us, they were all able to surface a ton of potential challenges as it relates to operationalizing that prototype orchestration agent, right, that we're talking about, even if they were really enthusiastic about the concept.
Yeah. So a whole raft of considerations emerged that as a MarTech leader, you have to be thoughtful about. First of all, there were things that, to be sure, were just outright missing in the prototype, either because they would have taken too long to build, or we would have needed a lot more context, or in some cases, the builder tool just didn't allow them. So, one is if you look at those 7 steps very closely, you're going to need, in certain cases, a human in the loop, so actually intervening at different steps, and at various places, a human on the loop, which is essentially monitoring the process. And so, first of all, right away, that mitigates a little bit of the efficiency and speed, but it's obviously essential. The other thing that we simply couldn't do for a number of different reasons was put in this kind of machine learning oriented learning cycle, and an adaptation cycle, which this process really needed, particularly because it gave different results from different runs. And so, again, unclear whether we could have even done that in the low code tool that we were doing, but also it just would have required a lot of data science chops that at an enterprise perspective, marketers don't always have ready access to. So these kind of adaptation cycles, I think, are particularly going to be an issue here in terms of the overall delivering overall value, but also kind of consistency on an agent run-to-run basis.
Yeah, the other thing our members caught was that the same process with the same inputs could deliver very different results. And this is a little scary, right? This gets to the point we made earlier on the importance of that underlying core AI services. Your agent is only going to be as robust as its weakest step, right? And remember that a 7-step agent like the one we prototyped with a 90% accuracy at each step, the output is going to be off 50% of the time. That's a lot.
Yeah, 90% accuracy is actually pretty good, but then you start daisy chaining this together, and it gets you to some real issues about reliability. And it turns out that agents, like people, can be kind of fussy and high maintenance and stubborn. And the list of things that we're missing in our prototype that would be required to make it truly production ready. I mentioned human in the loop, on the loop, learning cycles, so forth. But there's this whole other list of functional gaps in the prototype, and that the audience came up with, and we kind of did this together. And that list was pretty long. I mean, the prototype lacked sufficient context, which is so important, and why we talk so much, Jarrod, about the content and data and decision foundations of AI, and how important it is to stress that lower in the stack. We've had a number of previous discussions on that. So it lacks sufficient context. Statefulness is a really big issue, which is, transferring all the previous context to the next step, because agents are fundamentally kind of stateless type platforms. Applying all the necessary guardrails, and the more you apply, the more you realize you need. Consistency, which you mentioned. And then self-awareness. Agents are, they're really like, in a way, they're kind of like super smart toddlers. They're remarkably self-unaware, and they won't say no to even something really stupid. And so all the more reason why you need those human checkpoints. Now, what AI agent, advocates, and they're definitely out there. There's a huge list of agent cheerleaders in and across our market. What they're going to tell you, and they're right, is that all these shortcomings are theoretically resolvable. The thing is that they are theoretically resolvable with heavy development lift, potentially additional processing charges, and definitely ample, kind of operational maturity, and definitely overall AI maturity. So, we could say this this whole question about AI, about maturity matters in AI and generally, including core AI, but it becomes especially true with these independent autonomous orchestration agents.
So there's a lot of excitement, and a lot of it's real and valid, and I think we're starting to introduce some realism here. You've said these agents can be a lot like people, remarkably unaware, fussy, and high maintenance. I see that. But there's one other thing that came out of the council session that might almost be comforting to our listeners out there. And surprise, surprise, enterprises are not as advanced as you might think deploying agent AI technology, at least for marketing. We did a poll during the session, and we asked the attendees of the call, what's your marketing AI agent level today? What are you doing with agents in marketing? And the choices were don't know or hardly any. We're experimenting here and there. We have lit up some vendor-specific workflow agents. We are formally prototyping some cross-platform orchestration agents, and we have put some orchestration agents into production. And the breakdowns were pretty convincing in that the don't know hardly any and was at 45%, and we're experimenting here and there was only another 32%. So 77%, if my math is correct, were just in that experimentation phase or doing nothing at all. And only 3% said that they had put some orchestration agents into production. That's a remarkably small slice of the pie.
Of course, we need to point out these are almost entirely large enterprises, right, that make up our corporate membership. And on the one hand, they might be a bit more risk averse, but on the other hand, they have the resources and often the expertise to make this stuff work. And it looks like they're just really, really getting started when it comes to agentic MarTech. And honestly, that sounds about the right place to be right now.
All right, Tony. With that, I'll remind you all that are listening that at Real Story Group, we can help your team craft a business-focused AI and agentic strategy with the right use cases, the right tools to get you the real results. So just if that's of interest to you, please don't hesitate to reach out to either of us or any of our colleagues at the Real Story Group, and we'll point you in the right direction.
That's right, Jarrod. You might label us as... a lot of you use Microsoft Copilot. You might think of RSG as a human copilot as you fly this bumpy MarTech plane. But meanwhile, Jarrod, what's on top for next month's podcast?
So next up, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics again, Tony, and that's digital asset management. But we're going to do a little bit of future gazing. We're going to talk about the future of digital asset management. And it's probably not quite what you think. We've been doing a lot of research and thinking about this internally. But we think that the transformation of your DAM strategy is going to be one of the most important innovations you'll want to undertake to succeed in the AI world. So be sure to stop back for that one. Just hit the subscribe button to get alerted when that one drops. In the meantime, I invite everyone to share this episode and any other episodes with your friends. Like, subscribe, comment, and feel free to shoot us emails or notes via LinkedIn. And we're happy to continue this conversation with you in private. And until next time, Tony, we'll sign off for now. But thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, Jarrod. See you next time.